Hello everybody, welcome to Sir Chua's Accounting Lessons PH, and this is Discussion 3, Trade and Other Receivables. We are still at Intermediate Accounting Part 1. At the end of the video, you should be able to explain the nature of receivables, report the proper amount of receivables in the balance sheet, explain the nature and the calculations involved in notes receivable, and explain different receivable financing techniques. Before anything else, please like, share, and subscribe to Sir Chua's Accounting Lessons PH, and please hit the notification bell button to alert you of the latest video lessons. For all of your questions, comments, and suggestions, please put them down in the comment section below, and for webinar and speakership invites, please send me a message at kevintroy.chua1994@gmail.com. Thank you for your utmost support to Sir Chua's Accounting Lessons PH, and may these videos continue to help students in their online learning and academic development, and may these videos continue to help teachers in enhancing their lesson plans and teaching methodologies. Okay, let's start. In the last lesson, we discussed about the bank reconciliation statement and the proof of cash. So that was the part 2 of the cash and cash equivalents lesson, and you learned how to properly adjust the balances of both bank balances and book balances in order for you to know the true amount of cash an entity has. And also, you also learned about the 4-column bank reconciliation, which is called the proof of cash. Now, we will be discussing about receivables. Receivables are claims that an entity expects to be settled by customers or other parties through receipt of cash. Basically, receivables are meron hinihintay ang company na ma-receive. Okay? These are claims that an entity expects to receive, okay? There is an expectation to receive something, and that expectation to receive something is actually cash, okay? So, parang ang dating I'm expecting, I did something for you, so you give me cash because of that. Parang ganon, okay? So, ano ba yung sinasabi ko kanina na I did something for you? Ito po yung tatlong yon, okay? First one is the amount collectible from the sale of goods or services on account or as evidenced by a note of promise to pay. So, when an entity provided goods or services to their customers pero hindi pa sila nababayaran, nagkakaroon po ng receivable. Okay? Pwede pong accounts receivable, or di po kaya if it is evidenced by a note of promise to pay, then that is a note receivable. Okay? We also have receivables arising from other income such as interest, commissions, and rentals. So let's say for example, ikaw ay isang service company or merchandising company pero meron ka pang other income or ibang pinagkakakitaan like rentals, nagpaparenta ka, or you're under certain arrangements na meron kang commissions, yon. So pwede ka ring magkaroon ng mga receivable dyan. Okay, and syempre kapag tayo po ay nagpapautang, ayan, baka po meron ka ring kinikita na interest income from that. So, although hindi mo pa siya marireceive agad, then pwede rin po may mag-arise na receivables from them. And ang tawag po natin sa ganong transactions ay accrued revenue. Okay, so revenue that is already earned but is not yet received by the company. And lastly, we also have loans and advances to company officers and employees and all other claims. So, basta nagkakaroon ang company ng claims, kahit advances siya sa company officers or to any company employee, then that would also qualify as a receivable. Okay, so how do we classify receivables? First is trade receivables. Lahat po ng receivable na nag-a-arise from the normal operating procedures of the company, that would qualify as a trade receivable. And all other receivables na hindi po galing sa normal operations, like yung binanggit ko sa inyo kanina na advances to company officers or employees, then yun naman po yung example natin ng non-trade receivable. Now, receivables can be either a current asset or a non-current asset depending on yung ating pong criteria sa pagka-classify ng assets kung current or non-current. So basically po kasi pag trade receivables, since it's related to the operations of a company or the normal operating cycle, then basically that's a current asset, okay? Or kung non-trade receivable man po siya but it's less than 1 year na ma-expect mong ma-realize yung asset na yon, then that would also qualify as a current asset. But if the receivable is longer than 1 year or the normal operating cycle, automatically that would be classified as a non-current receivable or a non-current asset. So when do we recognize receivables? Receivables are recorded at the same time when the entity recognizes revenue involved in the transaction and we record it at the transaction price. So kung kailan po nangyari yung transaction, we record revenue. And basically, the time that we record revenue is also the time that we record the receivable. Okay? And we record it again at its transaction price. Now, what is the basis of the company for that transaction price? We have a business document that we give to the buyer, which is called the invoice. Okay? The invoice has the details of what has happened, the date of the transaction, the quantity and the prices of the goods that were purchased by the buyer, and the total amount payable by the buyer. Always remember that an amount payable by the buyer is something that is expected to be received by the company. Again, amount payable by the buyer, receivable ni seller. Baliktaran lang naman po yun, di ba? Okay, so kung may utang si buyer sa'yo, ikaw naman may i-expect na ma-receive galing sa kanya. We give that invoice to them so that they will be notified of the amount that is payable nila sa atin or yung ine-expect nating ma-receive galing sa kanila. And nandun po yung details ng transaction sa sales invoice. Okay. So, the normal business operations of an entity of selling of goods or services is where an account receivable arises when a transaction is on account. So, basically, accounts receivable happens, it's because you already rendered service or you already sold goods to your customers pero hindi ka pa po nababayaran. Ganun lang, okay? No direct cash payment was made by the buyer to the seller. That's where an account receivable arises. Now, at initial recognition, you always record it at the original transaction price as stated in the business documents. Kung magkano, then you record it as accounts receivable. That's it, okay? But subsequently, when we are already preparing the year-end reports, then we should remeasure your accounts receivable on its net realizable value, which is accounts receivable less allowance for uncollectible accounts. Kasi po, syempre, hindi naman po talaga lahat ng accounts receivable nare-receive natin 100%. Good for your company if you are receiving your receivables really 100%. But there are some companies who suffering from suffering, parang bigat naman, no? Pero there are companies who experience that na merong hindi na sila nababayaran na receivable. Okay? And we have techniques to estimate that. And we will be discussing that later. Either way, you always report your accounts receivable on the amount that is realizable. Magkano lang talaga ba yung ine-expect nating ma-receive? Okay? And we have different techniques and methodologies to for an entity to know that or to understand it. Okay? Now, let's talk about cash discounts, most especially for merchandising companies. In selling of goods, an entity may record receivables, gross of cash discounts, or net of cash discounts. So, ang receivables po natin, pwede natin i-record using the gross method and the net method. Remember po sa inyong merchandising accounting yung mga terms na 2/10, N/30, 5/15, N/60. Ayan, babalik po tayo dyan kasi po affected po ang ating accounts receivable with the cash discounts. Okay? Remember that cash discounts are discounts granted by the seller to the buyer to encourage them na magbayad ng maaga. Okay? O pag nagbayad ka sa akin within 10 days, I'll give you agad 2% discount. Pag nagbayad ka sa akin within 5 days, bigyan kita ng 5% discount. Okay? So, basically, that's how cash discounts happen. Okay, let's try this example. Jim and Company sold merchandise with a total selling price of 40,000 to Sullivan Company with terms 5/15 and over 30. Or let's translate that 5% cash discount if the buyer pays Jimin within 15 days, but the total amount payable is due in 30 days. Okay, so again, we have two methods of recording discounts and receivables. We have the gross method and we have the net method. Okay, so entries to record the sale. So I will be showing you both entries, both in the gross method and the net method. Okay. So to record the sale in gross method, ito yung kinasanayan nyo nung accounting 1, debit accounts receivable from Solyon for 40,000 and credit sales revenue for 40,000. Okay? Kung magkano yung receivable, record it as is at the transaction price. However, net method assumes na talagang nabawas na natin yung discount. Okay? So, if you will be getting the 5% of 40,000, that's 2,000. So, ibabawas na natin yung 2,000. The entry to record it under the net method would be debit accounts receivable for 38,000 and sales revenue for 38,000. Okay? Ganon siya. Nakatanggal na po yung 2% agad. Now, if the buyer, Solyon, paid within the discount period, what would be the entry? So, ito rin po yung kinasanayan nyo sa gross method. We debit cash na wala na po yung discount, syempre, kasi nabawasan na siya ng discount. And then, debit sales discount for 2,000. So, nagkakaroon po tayo ng account na contra sales account, yung sales discount, 2,000, and credit accounts receivable para mawala na yung receivable amounting to 40,000. Now, in the net method, you simply debit cash for 38,000 and you credit accounts receivable for 38,000. It's because the 2,000 sales discount has already been deducted nung una pa lang, nung ni-record mo na yung sale. Okay? So, basically, when you receive the receivable, diretso na, tanggal na po yung cash discount. However, what if the buyer paid outside the discount period? What will be your entry? In the gross method, diretsuhin mo lang ma-receive yung buong amount na 40,000, crediting accounts receivable for the same amount. However, in the net method, you debit cash at the full amount of 40,000 and you credit accounts receivable at net amount na 38,000 because ganyan natin siya unang ni-record. Magkakaroon tayo ngayon ng tinatawag nating miscellaneous income na sales discounts forfeited na 2,000. Sir, bakit po ganun? Sa gross method, ang recording natin ng revenue, 40,000. Yung net method, ang revenue natin, 38. Hindi po kaya mas mababa ang net income natin pag ginamit po natin yung net method? Okay, huwag kayong malilito. Actually, pareho lang. Kasi tinan nyo mabuti. Dito muna tayo sa sales transaction na nagbayad within the discount period. 40,000 yung sales transaction natin. Pag nagbayad within the discount period, bibigyan mo siya din naman ng discount na 2,000. So, magkano net sales natin? 38,000. Sa net method, ni-record mo na siyang 38,000 at 38,000 talaga siya pag nagbayad within the discount period. So, pareho lang 38, diba? Paano naman pag nagbayad outside the discount period? Ni-record mo yung sales revenue ng 40,000 at marireceive mo yung cash na 40,000. Sa net method, although 38,000 lang naka-record yung sales revenue, nagkaroon ka naman ng sales discount forfeited na other income na 2,000. So, basically, your total revenue pa rin naman in case hindi magbayad si buyer sa'yo within the discount period, babalik pa rin sa'yo yung 2,000 as part of your income. Okay? So, pareho lang siyang 40,000 kung hindi magbayad si buyer sa'yo within the discount period. Okay? So, that's the two methods on how you record cash discounts and its relationship to receivables. I hope you understand that. Okay, let's talk about yung mga bagay na hindi na bumabalik. Uncollectible accounts. Okay. Accounts receivable at times becomes uncollectible due to various reasons. Sometimes, nababankrupt yung company. Ang lala no? Bankrupt agad. So, hindi ka na mababayaran. But actually, that's one of the reasons. Okay? Or, nag-overdue dahil close kayo masyadong casual naman yung example ko, no? Baka close kayo ni supplier, nakakalimutan mo magbayad. Anyway, so, it's all about your credit worthiness, diba? Actually, companies, before granting you credit, i-check muna nila kung kaya mo ba talagang magbayad sa kanila in the future kung sakaling ang gusto mong mangyari credit sales transaction, no? But you will be learning that more on internal control. Our focus here is how to record them, okay? So an entity can record uncollectible accounts in two methods. We have the direct write-off method and the allowance method. Let's first talk about direct write-off method. In the direct write-off method, an immediate recognition of a particular uncollectible account removed directly from accounts receivable. Nalaman mo hindi ka na mababayaran diretso. Okay? So, you debit simply uncollectible accounts expense and tatanggalin mo diretso sa receivable for the same amount. Okay. Now, yung mga nagko-contest about sa paggamit ng direct write-off method is may chances kasi na, let's say for example, nangyari yung sales transaction noong 2019. Okay? So, at that time, in 2019, you debited accounts receivable and you credited sales for 2019. However, you determined in 2020 na hindi ka na pala mababayaran ng customer na yon. So, in 2020 lang nabuo yung entry mo na to. So, parang ang kino-contest nila sa paggamit ng direct write-off method, wag tayong gagamit ng direct write-off method kasi na-violate natin yung tinatawag nating matching principle at saka yung timeliness natin. Bakit daw na-violate? Kailan mo ni-record yung sales transaction? 2019. Pero yung related expense niya ay 2020 dahil na-determine mo noong 2020 na dun mo lang siya hindi marireceive. So, parang ang dating, dahil dyan sa transaction na yan, overstated yung income natin ng 2019, understated yung income natin ng 2020 dahil dun lang tayo nag-record ng expense. So, may mga nagko-contest sa paggamit ng direct write-off method kasi parang improper yung matching. Yung expense na record ng 2020, yung revenue transaction nangyari noong 2019. So, pwedeng mag-come up ng company ng kanilang estimate. Kaya po, nagkaroon ng allowance method. Ginawa ko talaga ng kwento, di ba? Pero, what I mean is, a company can also use allowance method in order for them to properly estimate uncollectible accounts without waiting for the actual amount uncollectible, and at least there is a proper matching of revenues and expenses on a timely basis. Okay? Now, in allowance method, it allows estimates of uncollectible accounts. Now, one of the things that you need to do in allowance method is the year-end adjustment, which debits an uncollectible accounts expense, crediting allowance for uncollectible accounts. Later in the problems, you'll understand how this adjusting entry functions. Okay? Now, in the allowance method, we have these different entries. So, let me show them to you one by one. If an account receivable is written off during the year, your entry is debiting allowance for uncollectible accounts. Unlike in the direct write-off method, which you use uncollectible accounts expense, here you debit the allowance account. Okay? Crediting accounts receivable. In any case that you determined na mababayaran ka na pala bigla nung customer mong yon, i-reinstate mo yung accounts receivable. So, babaliktarin mo lang yung entry, you debit accounts receivable, and you credit allowance for uncollectible accounts. Okay, and then the recovery and receipt of payment is your simple transaction like how you do it in accounting 1, debit cash and credit accounts receivable. Okay, ganun lang po siya. Okay, let's talk about notes receivable. Kung mapapansin nyo, wala pa masyadong numbers, no? Inuuna kong i-discuss yung theories. Mamaya tayo mag-rakraka ng problem. Okay? We have 5 problems. I have 5 problems prepared for you. Okay? Konti pa nga yun kung tutusin kasi in reality, receivables are long, but I'm trying to make it much more concise for you just to hit the main points. Anyway, kumukulog Oh, hello po sa mga nanonood nito ngayon. I'm recording this on a rainy day. Okay, let's continue. A receivable that is supported by notes of promise to pay or a promissory note is called a note receivable. So we have 2 kinds of notes receivable. We have the interest bearing and non-interest bearing. When a note receivable is interest-bearing, it carries a stated rate of interest. Talagang may interest siyang nakalagay doon. Pero pag non-interest-bearing, hindi naman po ibig sabihin nun, walang interest. Okay? Hindi porke sinabi, non-interest bearing notes receivable has no interest at all. Tapos sasagot mo, true. Mali ka, kapatid. Okay? That's false because non-interest bearing, the interest forms part already of the face amount. Nasa loob nung mismong amount yung interest. So, in reality, may interest pa rin po yung non-interest bearing. Okay? Ang sinasabi lang, pag interest bearing, naka-state doon yung interest. Pag non-interest bearing, nakapaloob, nakatago. Okay? Okay, and then we also have loans receivable. Nag-a-arise naman po ang loans receivable sa mga companies na, syempre, nag-e-extend ng loan. Okay? A loan receivable is an amount owed from a debtor to a creditor. Debtor, umuutang. Creditor, nagpautang. These creditors are usually banks or other financial institutions. So basically, nag-a-arise po yung transactions natin ng loans receivable sa mga ganyang industries, okay, na nag-e-extend ng loan. It is a financial asset from a loan transaction granted by an entity to a borrower. So if the entity is a bank or financial institution, nagkakaroon sila ng financial asset na tinatawag nating loans receivable because nagpautang sila or nag-grant sila ng loan sa isang borrower. The initial measurement of a loan receivable is the fair value, and then you add any related transaction cost for that. But subsequently, you record it at amortized cost using the effective interest method. Okay. And then last for our theory discussion is what we call receivable financing. Receivable financing is the way entities obtain cash to finance their operations should their cash balances deemed to be lacking. Ang isang company, pwede nilang pagkakitaan yung receivable kahit hindi pa nila nare-receive as cash. Ganito po kasi yan. Ang ultimate goal po kasi talaga natin sa ating mga receivables, ma-receive natin talaga siya fully in cash. Kaso, sometimes companies need to finance their operations and these receivables are still not yet paid. Inihintay mong ma-receive, di ba? So, what they can do is what you call receivable financing. Pagkakakitaan ng company yung kanilang mismong receivables para mas mabilis silang makakuha ng cash. Okay? So, we have 4 different kinds of receivable financing like pledge, assignment, factoring, and notes receivable discounting. Let's define them one by one. Okay? Pledge, accounts receivable serve as a collateral for a loan arrangement. So, parang ang nangyari, the entity entered into a loan arrangement, ang ginamit nilang collateral is yung accounts receivable nila. It works the same way in assignment, however, it's a more formal transaction because there is already a transfer of rights in the accounts receivable. But it is also in consideration for a loan arrangement that the company has entered into. Okay? Pag factoring naman, you are selling your accounts receivable. Okay? So, imagine, binenta mo nga naman yung accounts receivable mo. So, magkakaroon ka kagad ng cash nun na hindi mo na hihintayin pang ma-receive yung receivable mo. Nagkaroon ka kagad ng cash because you sold your receivable. Okay? And then we also have notes receivable discounting, which is obtaining cash before maturity date of the note, of the loan, through discounting the note to a financing company. Okay? So later, we will be expounding those things in a problem. Okay? And now that I've told you about problems, let's solve some problems. And this is problem number 1. Says the company has an accounts receivable balance amounting to 467,000 at the start of 2020. During the year, credit sales amounts to 3 million, while sales return amount to 80,000. Accounts written off is 68,000. The entity estimated that future sales returns will amount to 90,000 by December 31. So there is an anticipation of future sales return. And then, estimated uncollectible accounts per aging of receivables. When you say aging of receivables, that's the analysis of a company gano'ng katagal na yung receivables ay hindi nare-receive ng company. 0 to 30 days, 31 to 60 days, more than 60 days, mga ganon. Tapos may related percentage na ine-estimate si company doon kung magkano na hindi nila ma-receive doon. Okay, ganon siya. Okay, so per aging of receivables, the uncollectible accounts is 64,000. Collections were made on accounts receivable and has credited all trade receivable subsidiary ledgers by a total of 2,530,000. The question is, how much is the net realizable value of accounts receivable to be presented in the December 31, 2020 Statement of Financial Position? Let's answer the problem. Okay. So, ang tinatanong lang po sa inyo ay net realizable value. Ibig sabihin po nun, kung ano yung accounts receivable, ibabawas nyo po doon lahat ng ine-expect nyo naman na hindi na marireceive. Okay? Pero syempre, the first step that we need to do is computein muna magkano yung ending balance na accounts receivable. So, your starting point is the accounts receivable on January 1, 2020, which is 467,000. This one, okay? And then, you add your credit sales amounting to 3 million. Bakit po natin in-add yung credit sales na 3 million? Kasi po, yan po yung sales na nangyari during the year, pero hindi ka pa nababayaran ni customer. Debit accounts receivable, credit sales, yan po yun. Kaya po natin in-add sa accounts receivable balance. Then you deduct all sales return kasi po pag nagkakaroon ng sales return, so magde-debit ka na ngayon ng sales returns and allowances, kay-credit mo sa accounts receivable kasi nag-return yung customers mo sa'yo ng merchandise. So yung accounts receivable, or ine-expect mo ma-receive galing sa kanila, syempre mababawasan din. Okay? And then syempre nagkaroon po ng write-off na 68,000. So they determined na hindi na ma-receive yung 68,000, so minus na 68,000. Okay. And remember, binabawasan po natin yung receivable sa mga amount na na-receive na natin. So sabi po dito, collections were made on accounts receivable and kinredit na po lahat ng subsidiary ledger. O balik tayo sa concept ng subsidiary ledger. Di ba meron tayong accounts receivable control account? Balik tayo ng fundamentals of accounting 1. Pero meron po tayong subsidiary ledger o yung ledger natin kada customer. So, ibig sabihin po nun, pag kinredit mo na lahat ng subsidiary ledgers ng customer related sa accounts receivable, ibig sabihin nagbayad na sila. Kasi nakapag-entry ka na ng debit cash, credit accounts receivable. Magkano binayad ng mga customers mo sa'yo? 2,530,000. So, you need to deduct that to your accounts receivable balance as collections during the year. Okay? So, when you already have that information, that is your ending balance of your accounts receivable as at December 31, 2020, which amounts to 789,000. Now, let's look in the problem, ano po kaya yung mga pwede pang makabawas sa accounts receivable balance, because we need to report accounts receivable at its net realizable value. The first one is the company has an anticipation of future sales return, which is 90,000. So you need to deduct that allowance for future sales return. And syempre, yung ating pong estimation ng uncollectible accounts, which amounts to 64,000. So the net realizable value of your accounts receivable to be reported in the Statement of Financial Position as at December 31, 2020 amounts to 635,000. Okay? Always remember that we record accounts receivable at its transaction price. Kita naman, di ba? Kung magkano yung ine-expect nating receivable, record lang. Pag na-receive natin, record lang din. But always remember, subsequently, at the end of the accounting period, you should report it at its net realizable value because we have anticipations of uncollectible accounts and future sales returns. I hope you understand problem number 1, and let's proceed to problem number 2. Melody Company uses the allowance method for accounting for uncollectible accounts. For receivable aging, again, sabi ko po sa inyo kanina, yung aging ay analysis po ng account balances kung gaano katagal na siyang hindi pa nababayaran sa company. Okay? It was estimated that 3%, 10%, and 15% will not be collected anymore. For receivables aging 0 to 30 days, 31 to 60 days, and over 60 days respectively. So for 3% po, yung mga 0 to 30 days, and then 10% naman po sa 31 to 60 days, and 15% po sa over 60 days. These all amount to 4 million, 2 million, and 1,500,000. That's also respectively. Net credit sales for the year is 30 million and the balance before adjustment of the allowance for uncollectible accounts amount to 50,000 credit balance. So pag tinignan nyo daw po yung allowance for uncollectible accounts na T account before adjustment, may nakalagay po sa credit or credit balance niya 50,000 na. Ang tanong, what amount should be recognized in the adjusting entries as uncollectible accounts expense for the current year? Okay, what we need to do is we need to analyze first magkano ang hindi na natin marireceive per account receivable aging schedule. Okay? The first one is, yung 0 to 30 days daw po natin, hindi na natin marireceive yung 3% ng 4 million. So, we assume or we estimate na 120,000 yung hindi na natin marireceive sa kanya. And that's just simply 4 million multiplied by 3%. We do the same way with the next one, which is 31 to 60 days. 10% daw po yung hindi na natin i-expect na ma-receive on the 2 million accounts receivable. So, that's 200,000. And we also, again, do the same way. For over 60 days, that's 15%. And then you multiply it by 1,500,000. So that's 225,000. So the required balance of the allowance account is 545,000 because you determined that these amounts will not be received anymore. You estimated it that you will not be receiving that anymore. So that is the required balance of the allowance account. So kumbaga, pag tinignan mo yung allowance account at the end of the year, dapat yan ang laman, 545,000. And remember that the allowance account has a credit balance. Dapat po kasi talaga dapat credit balance siya. Kaso may nakalagay na daw po na 50,000 before adjustment. Okay? So what you will do is you will deduct the credit balance na naiwan dun sa T account before adjustment, in order for you to determine the proper amount that should be recorded in the adjusting entries, which is 495,000. Bakit? Kung ang T account mo, sige, magdo-drawing ako since hindi ko nalagay sa slides. Okay. Kung ang T account mo ng allowance account ay ganito. Okay? Allowance. Ganito daw po itsura, may 50,000 dun sa credit before adjustments. Kaso, sa iyo pong aging of accounts receivable and estimation of uncollectible accounts, 545,000 daw po kasi yung required balance ng allowance. Yan daw po kasi yung iyong ini-expect na talagang dapat, ini-expect. Yan yung uncollectible na ni-estimate mo, 545. Kaso nga, may 50,000 na dito sa credit. Sabi natin, yung T account na to, dapat, ang laman niya, 545. Kaya minus natin yung 50,000, ang adjusting entry natin, 495,000. Debit uncollectible accounts expense, credit allowance for uncollectible accounts. So, ano ngayon ang itsura? Pag kinredit natin ngayon yung 495,000 sa allowance for uncollectible account, di magkakaroon dito ngayon, 495,000. Okay, tapos na accounting period, pwede ka na mag-rule and balance ng T account. O magkano to? 545,000. Ano tong 545,000 na to, sir? Ito po, yung required balance in the allowance account. Okay? Sir, pag tinanong, magkano po ang adjusting entry amount? O, di ito, yung 495,000. Okay? I hope that's clear, ha? Sir, paano pag debit? Di ganito lang. Pag debit, add. Pag credit, minus. Okay? Then you apply the analysis that I told you. Again, kapag ka debit balance before adjustment, add nyo yun. And then, pag credit naman, minus nyo yun. Okay? So, that's problem number 2. And we proceed with problem number 3. Pilot company provided the following information. So, we have accounts receivable balance at the start of 2020 and at the end of 2020. And their respective net realizable values. During the year, the firm recovered past written off accounts amounting to 96,000 and written off 143,000 pesos accounts. How much is the uncollectible accounts expense for the year ended December 31, 2020? We will be solving it like this. Okay. So, lista mo yung accounts receivable ng December 31, 2019, which is actually, that's the beginning of 2020, and then yung para rin po sa 2020. And then, i-compare mo siya dun sa net realizable value. Ano ang naaamoy nyong relationship sa kanilang dalawa? Wala ka maamoy na relationship kasi wala ka nun. Joke lang. Okay. So, kung yan yung accounts receivable mo, pero ito lang yung ine-expect mong ma-realize sa kanya, the difference, sorry, pumiyok. Sorry po. Okay. So, ano kaya yung difference nung dalawang yan? Again, kung ito yung ating accounts receivable at ito yung net realizable value natin, anong relationship nung dalawa? Yung amount na uncollectible. Okay? So, that is your allowance for uncollectible accounts. Kaso, ang tinatanong sa inyo, hahanapin natin from that information yung ating uncollectible accounts expense. Now, didiretso na natin kasi kailangan natin dito ng working back technique. Ito na po yung solution. Okay. So, your equation is actually allowance for uncollectible accounts at the beginning of the year. I-add nyo lahat ng recoveries of past written accounts. Bakit ina-add natin yung recoveries of past written off accounts? Remember the entry pag nagre-recover tayo? Debit accounts receivable kasi nire-reinstate na natin yung accounts receivable. Then credit allowance for uncollectible account. Okay? So, kinredit natin siya kaya ina-add natin. Okay? And then, ina-add natin yung uncollectible accounts expense. As you know, ganun tayo mag-adjusting entry, di ba? Debit uncollectible accounts expense, credit allowance for uncollectible accounts. Pero mina-minus po natin yung nira-write off. Kasi kapag nira-write off natin against accounts receivable, we debit naman yung allowance for uncollectible accounts, credit accounts receivable. Okay? So, that is your equation. And then, the allowance ending is 47,000. So, you just work back. Since your allowance ending is 47,000, which is this one, you add back 143,000 and then you deduct 96,000 and you deduct 56,000. You will get the central part of the equation, which is the uncollectible accounts expense of 38,000. Okay, so that's actually a problem-solving technique that you can apply for problems relating to accounts receivable and allowance for uncollectible accounts. Okay, I hope you understand that. And for problem number 4, we will be moving on with notes receivable. Gion Company decided to sell a used machinery. So, yung kanilang machinery, bebenta nila. The carrying amount of the machinery at the time of sale is 2 million, no? Ang nangyari, yung bumili sa kanila ay ang inabot sa kanila in non-interest bearing note. Okay? The entity accepted a non-interest bearing note which is 5 million. Okay? This note receivable requires 10 payments annually na tig for 500,000. Tama nga naman, 500,000 times 10, 5 million. The transaction happened at the end of 2019 and the first 500,000 payment was made the next year, after 1 year. For all similar notes, the prevailing market interest rate is 12%. Okay? So, manghihiram tayo ng prevailing market interest rate kasi non-interest bearing yung note natin. So, i-assume natin na dito sa 5 million na to, nasa loob niya na yung 12% na interest na yon. Kasi nga po, non-interest bearing. So, we have 5 questions here, which is the carrying amount of the note at the end of 2019, and how much is the unearned interest income or yung interest component na nasa loob ng 5 million. And then, syempre, dahil nagbenta tayo ng machinery, kukumputin din natin yung gain on sale. And then, yung interest income na marirealize natin after 1 year, dahil dumaan na yung 1 year at nagbayad na yung bumili sa atin ng first 500,000. And then, the carrying amount of the note receivable at December 31, 2020 credits to Conrado T. Valix and Christian Aris Valix for this problem, which you can see in Practical Financial Accounting Textbook, ACPA Examination Reviewer. Okay? Maraming salamat po, sirs. Okay, let's answer question number 1. Okay, how much is the carrying amount of the note receivable as at December 31, 2019? Remember that the carrying amount of the note receivable is the present value of the payments at the time of the sale. remember that there is an annual payment required of 500,000 and you multiply it to the present value factor concerning 12% for 10 years. And this is the formula. 1 minus 1.12, which represents the 12%, raised to negative 10. That's actually an exponent ha, pero hindi ko nilang pinakita as exponent. Okay? So you raise it to negative 10, which is 10 years, and then divide it to 0.12, and you will get a present value factor of 5.65. Okay, so 500,000 times the present value factor of 5.65, the carrying amount of the note receivable is 2,825,000. So pag titignan yung mabuti, ang face value nung note 5 million, pero in reality 2,825,000 lang talaga siya kasi nasa loob na nga po ng 5 million yung interest. At dahil nabanggit ko na nga po na nasa loob ng 5 million yung interest, we can now answer question number 2. If the face value of the note is 5 million but the present value of the annual payments is only, or that's actually the carrying value, 2,825,000, then there is a component of unearned interest income. Pag maminusin nyo lang po itong dalawang ito, that is 2,175,000. So that's your answer for question number 2. That is the unearned interest income at the point of sale. Yan po yung ine-expect nating marireceive nating interest income hanggang mabuo yan annually. Okay? Now, let's compute for the gain on sale of machinery at the time of sale, and that would answer your question number 3. If the present value of the annual payments is 2,825,000, that represents the selling price. Okay? Now, the machinery's carrying amount at the time of sale is 2 million. Automatically, you get a gain on sale of 825,000. Don't you ever compare the face value of the note with the carrying amount of machinery and telling me that the gain on sale is 3 million. That's wrong. Because 5 million carries interest inside of it. So what you need to compare is the carrying amount of the note receivable, which is the present value, which is 2,825,000. Okay? And that's your gain on sale of machinery. Now, in any case na nalilito kayo sa pagkuha ng gain on sale of machinery, then you can do this entry. You debit notes receivable for the face amount of 5 million. Then you credit machinery at 2 million na carrying amount. And then credit unearned interest income na 2,175,000. And then the credit balance na balance dun sa entry natin, yun yung gain on sale of machinery na 825,000. Okay? So that's how you do the journal entry for that sale. Now, for question number 4, after 1 year, magkano na yung interest income? O, di ganito lang. If the present value of the note is 2,825,000, we simply multiply it to the interest rate of 12%. The interest income after 1 year na dumaan is 339,000. Now, for question number 5, how much is the carrying amount of the note receivable? So, here's how we compute it. Remember that the note receivable face value is 5 million, but the first payment was made after a year. You need to deduct that kasi nga nagbayad na ng first payment. So, yung note receivable natin, mababawasan na. 4,500,000. Now, meron tayong unearned interest income na nakapaloob nga dun sa 5 million, which is 2,175,000. Pero na-earn na natin for the first year yung 339,000. Kaya ang remaining balance ng unearned natin is 1,836,000. So, if you will be analyzing it like this, parang kanina, di ba? 5 million pero nasa loob nun yung interest. So, ganun din yung gagawin nating analysis dito at the end of December 31, 2020. Yung note receivable mo na 4,500,000, may laman pa siya sa loob na unearned interest income na 1,836,000. Kaya po, pag pinag-deduct nyo yung dalawa, that is the carrying amount of the note receivable by December 31, 2,664,000, which will be the basis next year naman pag nagbayad uli ng interest. Okay? Until makomplete yung 10 years and then bayad na yung mismong note receivable kay Gion. Okay? And then last problem, problem number 5. Abby Company factored. Ito po, factoring yung problem. 5 million of its accounts receivable to a finance company to generate cash. Control to this receivable was surrendered by Abby. From this transaction, a fee of 5% was assessed and retained a holdback equal to 5% of accounts receivable in excess of 500,000. The factor has also charged 15% interest computed on a weighted average time to maturity of the receivable of 60 days. How much cash was initially received from the factoring and how much is the cost of factoring the receivable? Again, factoring, pinagkakakitaan mo yung receivable mo, binenta mo siya. Pero syempre, hindi porke binenta mo yung 5 million na accounts receivable through factoring, 5 million din yung cash na initially marireceive mo from factoring kasi sisingilin ka ng factoring fee, magkakaroon ng factors holdback at magbabayad ka ng 15% interest equivalent for 60 days. So this is how you compute it. You start with the factored accounts receivable, which is 5 million. And then, una nyo pong i-deduct is yung factoring fee na 5%. So you simply get the 5% of the factored accounts receivable, which will give you 250,000. Now, for the factors holdback, remember, it's 5% of accounts receivable in excess of 500,000. So kukunin nyo daw po yung 5% after mag-deduct ng first 500,000. Okay? In excess of 500,000. So, kailangan hindi magkakaroon ng effect dun sa 500,000 yung 5%. Okay? So, 5 million minus 500,000 times 5%, 225,000. And you also get the interest. 5 million times 15% times 60 over 365. 365 means the whole year. Okay? Which is 123,288. So you just deduct everything from the factored accounts receivable and the cash received from factoring is this one. 4,401,712. Okay? So, yun nga lang, anong disadvantage pag factoring? Kung hihintayin mo sana yung lahat ng receivables na to ng 5 million, ang marireceive mo talaga as cash from operations is 5 million. But because you immediately, or there is a need for you to generate cash as early as possible, you entered into a factoring transaction. So, nagkaroon ka ng 4,401,712. Hindi na nga lang siya 5 million. Pero kung nagmamadali kang magka-cash, then that would be better. May cash ka na. Hindi mo na hihintayin yung 5 million na ma-realize. Okay. Now, how much is the cost of factoring the receivable? You just add the factoring fee of 250,000 and the interest that was charged to you, which is 123,288 for a total cost of factoring of 373,288. Awesome. Okay, so that has been our discussion for trade and other receivables, and our next lesson is International Accounting Standard 2. We will be talking about inventories. The cost of inventories, the inclusions and exclusions for that, the different cost techniques or cost methods like first in, first out, periodic weighted average, perpetual moving average, and then the measurement of inventories on lower of cost and net realizable value, and then other inventory estimation methods like gross profit method and the retail inventory method. Thank you for listening to Sir Chua. And again, please like, share, and subscribe to Sir Chua's Accounting Lessons PH and hit the notification bell button to alert you of the latest video lessons. For all of your questions, comments, and suggestions, please put them down in the comment section below, and for webinar and speakership invites, and if you want to say something to me, you can email me at kevintroy.chua1994@gmail.com. This has been Sir Chua's Accounting Lessons PH College Edition. This is Intermediate Accounting Part 1. To God be all the glory, honor, and praise. Thank you, students. I love you all, and have a great day.